what up, Smudge Wellness? It's your girl, Jasmine Kylene. I am a spiritual counselor, I'm a journalist, I'm a human being just galloping around, and I'm so grateful to be here and to share my heart and soul with this incredible platform. I tried to film this video on a day when I was looking much cuter, and some like technological difficulties were happening, which is fine because you know what, this is about ancestors, and ancestors want you to come at your rawest state. So I'm in my own sweatshirt, funny enough. This is my brand, you can cop it if you would like. I'm in my own gear, and there's no makeup happening, but it's fine because I'm just as much of a bad bitch, right? So as I basically already spoiled, today I'm really excited to come to you guys and talk a little bit about what it means to be intentional with connecting to your ancestors, right? And I feel like this is the perfect time to be talking about it. Towards the end of the year is when the veil is honestly the most thin, and that in itself is like a wild sentence because it's a veil, right? So like, how could it not be thin? The veil is always thin. However, around Scorpio season and holidays like, of course, Dia de los Muertos, it's a really beautiful and potent time to connect to your ancestors and to be intentional with your dialogue surrounding what it is that you're calling in as far as guidance or simply connection, or maybe more knowledge on where it is that you come from and where you're supposed to be going with where it is that you come from. But it's a very, very large task to sort of take on, right? Doing ancestral work. I feel like we throw around like breaking ancestral curses quite loosely when it's really, it's a heavy and really important theme in our lives. And so, of course, relative to your own personal background, ethnic background, where you come from, your origin, your ethnic origin, there is probably some traditions and some practices that hold intentionality when it comes to connecting to your ancestors. But if you are a beginner when it comes to ancestral work, or simply wanting to start to create a dialogue with your ancestors, then these are some easy ways that I think you can at least start inviting in their energy and getting to know them a bit more, and of course reaping the nectar of getting to know them, which is guidance and love and of course fierce protection. So if you haven't already, I would deeply advise you to set up an altar dedicated to your ancestors. Of course, if you already have an altar and you want to just kind of like blend the two, you can do that. I move around a lot, so it depends kind of like where I'm at, but sometimes I'll just kind of have like one dedicated altar space, and that ends up being like where I work with my ancestors and also where I like meditate and do everything else. But if you have an altar or some sort of like dedicated sacred space, incorporating them into how you adorn that space is very important, whether that means placing offerings that are relative to maybe a specific ancestor, right? If it's like closer in lineage, so like a great-grandmother or a grandmother, but also like culturally, if you know that you come from, for example, I'll use me. My mom is from Spain and my dad is a Black American. So once I did my ancestry, which is, we'll get into that later. Once I did that, I was able to find out that most of like my Black and like just my African ancestry comes from Nigeria. So getting into sort of like the traditions and the different like ancestral goddesses that are worshipped within Nigerian heritage, I was able to really deeply connect with goddess Yemaya, and so I believe her to be one of my ancestors. So like at my altar I'll have things that relate to goddess Yemaya. So for example, like seashells, right, because she works with the ocean. So obviously it doesn't have to be as extensive as that, but for example, if you know that you have sort of like South American heritage and you know certain fruits that align with the country it is you have ancestors from, you can like start to put those, certain flowers as like offerings, and of course a picture of any recent ancestors that you want to connect with deeper. I have a photo of my grandmother and my great-grandmother on my altar, and that's just a beautiful way to like incorporate them visually into my prayer when I sit at my altar. Because truthfully, if you want to start, because this bleeds into the second step that I was going to bring up, which is starting a dialogue with them, right? And the first most intentional way to start a dialogue with them is to meditate at your altar with these like given and like chosen offerings, or just like a display of them sort of like at the foot of your altar. You can sit down and you can meditate and start to reel in energy from these token items that you've placed there. Even if you have like, if you are in ownership of things that come from certain ancestors that are like closer in lineage, putting those at your altar as well, instead of sitting and meditating and starting an intimate dialogue with your ancestors is going to be a beautiful way to sort of start that line of communication. I would definitely invite you to have a line of communication with them throughout the day. I mean, I will just be And I'll be at the grocery store, child, and I'll be like, if something that is like stress-inducing or anxiety-inducing happens to me, I'm like, I'm gonna go ahead and call in the strength of my ancestors, or like a specific one. Like I'll call in, I have like a great-great-grandmother that I know of to be Enriqueta, so I'll like call her in. And it's important because if they're closer in lineage, you can kind of get to know them a little bit, right? Through stories of, you know, relatives that are still around that can tell you like what they know. And so I know that, for instance, I have a certain ancestor who's who lived a very comical life. They endured a lot of strife, but they were always known to laugh and smile through it. And so anytime I'm going through something that's really just heavy to carry, I'll kind of call on their strength and be like, show me a way to find the humor in the situation. And I always do. And of course, if you know that there's a lot of like warrior women in your lineage, or I mean, of course there's no way that there isn't, right? So like calling on that divine feminine energy when you need protection, or calling on that divine masculine energy when you need to get something done, you know, just whatever it is that you kind of like want to pull in, call on your ancestors for it, and do it as simply as asking for it, and just like starting that direct line of communication, because the universe, the veil is so thin. The universe is going to communicate with you the minute that you start to open that line of communication. The minute that you set the intention that you want that communication to come through, it will, and it'll come through in the experience of it. But also, when I first started communicating with my ancestors, I sort of asked, like, show up for me in a way that is within my language, in a way that I'll understand. And I started finding pennies everywhere, which is so funny because I see one of the ones that I saved the other day. But I started finding like face-up pennies during times of like high stress, or just times when I needed to know that there was someone who had my back. And I know that that's, you know, because like angels will communicate with me more through like feathers and other instances, but whenever it's a penny, I know that it's my ancestors. So talk to your ancestors, let them know, hey, I'm calling on you, I'm thanking you, I'm wanting to get to know more about you. Show up in ways that I can understand, and that'll be through items, through synchronicities, through articles that just happen to fall in your lap and tell you exactly what it is you need to hear. It'll start to slowly unravel. And of course, another way to do it, this is a little bit controversial, but if you are open to it, exploring your DNA and like the ancestry that comes from your DNA, whether it's through like literally ancestry.com or some other service. I don't really know how many exist. I know 23andMe is a thing, but I feel like that's more like health things. I'm not sure. But I did Ancestry. I did that because while I was very aware of like my maternal lineage, my paternal lineage was a little bit iffy. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna send in my DNA, and it ended up being one of the best things I've ever done because it gave me such deep context of like, okay, where can I really like look into, especially like, I mean, just to keep it 100 with you, if you are any sort of like, if you have any sort of like racial ambiguity, or if just honestly like if you're a person of color, then you kind of like owe it to yourself to know, where did y'all take me from? You know what I mean? So like, you know, my dad was always like, yeah, I'm Black American, and I was like, right, where are you from? And so now that I have knowledge of like just how much from me comes from Nigeria and like Cameroon, now I'm aware of like, okay, so that means my ancestors were there. And so I started to research, you know, about like more like Nigerian heritage, and I found out about the Yoruba peoples, and so it painted a more vivid picture of the people that came before me, of the women that came before me, and the traditions that they have, and how I can now start to incorporate those traditions into my, you know, day-to-day routine, because that's a way to sort of like keep them alive, right? I started doing cacao ceremonies because I know that that is a really intentional way that they used to gather, and I feel like every time I partake in a cacao ceremony, which by the way, if you're looking for a cacao ceremony facilitator, Stephanie Madrid is that bitch. I'm just letting you know, check her out. She's incredible. She has a blog about it as well. But the more that I started to incorporate just how they existed on a day-to-day with how I exist on a day-to-day, whether that was through very small things like things that they eat, but also like the way that they practice spirituality, and bleeding that and blending that with how I now practice spirituality has brought me much closer to my ancestors, and it really just sort of like blew up this level of intentionality with them as well. So yeah, do that. So yeah, look into your ancestry, see what you find, if there's any sort of like clarity that you're searching for within that, and also just know that like I now have an entire trip planned. I don't know when I'm going, but I do know that I'm going to physically visit all of the spots that I have ancestral heritage from but have never met in person, and I'm very excited. And last but not least, this is for the ancestors that are sort of closer in lineage. If you have any access to things that they wore, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you doing that. Of course, setting an intention over it, because, you know, when we're connecting with our ancestors, you have to be very careful. I should definitely talk about this. So when we're calling in our ancestors and when we're calling in help from our ancestors or any sort of like divine guidance, we want to make sure that we're being intentional with who it is that we are calling in. And this isn't to demonize any of the people that have come before us. They all carried a very special role in sort of paving the way for us to be here, but it's important to make sure that you are calling forth ancestors that are coming from a space of unconditional and abundant love. And that they don't have any, that there's no harsher energies, just to filter and be really intentional with who you are calling in and making sure that there are no harsher energies sort of like seeping their way through, because that can be a weight that you begin to carry. So, especially when it comes to like rocking any jewelry that your ancestors rocked, you want to make sure that that specific ancestor, at the very least, sort of bid farewell to this like earthly experience in a lighthearted manner. Just making sure that you are not holding or housing any energy that is too large or heavy or maybe potentially negative, is really important for like your own personal well-being. But when it comes to like calling in and calling forth ancestral guidance, you want to make sure that you are putting a really strong filter through that, and that it's ancestors that are still coming from a space of love, unconditional love, and don't want to carry out any vengeance or anything through you. Sorry, this is okay. I don't want to scare you or like make this go anywhere else, but I do know a lot of people who have done ancestral work and have called in ancestors that like they kind of had to do a lot of work to like send back to the other side of the veil. And not to say that anyone they called in was like demonic or anything like that, but rather that you want to make sure you're calling in just ancestors that are led by and only have the intention of experiencing an abundant amount of love, and that is all. So with that being said, if you know sort of the story, the energy of the ancestor that you have access to like old jewelry of, rocking it is a really beautiful way to connect with them and to keep their energy with you on a day-to-day. So I have this ring that I carry, and it's like there's like a ruby in it, and this is my great-grandmother's. And then I have a necklace, and this was my grandmother's, just like a one grandma, great grandma. Okay, so carrying their jewelry with me really helped to liven their energy on my day-to-day, and it's a consistent reminder, and it's also a consistent reminder to maintain that daily dialogue. The more that you pour into that dialogue and the more that you charge that line of communication, the stronger it's going to get on both ends. So just like I see it and I remember like, okay, Enriqueta's with me and I can speak to her, or you know, I can call on her, whether it's for guidance, but also it's important to like not just use your ancestors, right? I mean, they're there to help you, but sometimes just like call on them to say thank you, and like what was your mission, and like how can I help you further it, and you know, just making sure that it's an even amount of take and give. So yeah, those are some ways to just start. Oh my god, scared. So those are some ways to start communication with your ancestors, and to at the very least build into what it means to start doing really intentional ancestral work, which can bleed into like cacao ceremonies and a lot of different fleshed out rituals. But if you're a beginner to this, as I once was, and still, you know, I'm transitioning into being more thorough about it, but that is a way to just like on a lighthearted level keep it really safe and playful and fun and honestly transformative. The things that will come through, and sometimes you don't realize how badly you need ancestral guidance until you start to ask for it, and until it starts to show up and you're like, oh, okay, I needed this, you know? So whether you're working on your divine feminine healing, your divine masculine healing, inner child healing, sort of finding your mission in life and your purpose, calling in your ancestors is a beautiful way to do that. So I'm sending you all my love. I hope that you are well, and I hope that this serves you. Please let me know if it does, and yeah, good luck. Also, of course, thank you to Smudge Wellness for housing my voice as always. And if you want to continue experiencing and consuming my content, or if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can hit me up at Jasmine Kylene on Instagram, or you can visit my website at jasminekylene.com. That is all. I love you. Bye.